So if you're new to cruising or anchoring, you might think that it's always a better bet to pick up a mooring ball if there's one available. But is that always the case? Hi, I'm Nico Waters and welcome to the Boat Galley Podcast. Today I'm talking about mooring versus anchoring and maybe give you some reasons to start trusting your own gear. Today's episode of the Boat Galley Podcast is sponsored by MantisMarine.com, maker of the Mantis Anchor, now available in models with and without a roll bar. On Calypso, we have the one without a roll bar because our bowsprit and anchor roller makes having a roll bar not really practical. Proven to set reliably in the most challenging bottoms, the Mantis Anchor digs like no other, making anchoring safer and boating more enjoyable. Mantis Marine brings to market practical, durable, and affordable marine products, including anchoring gear, scuba diving accessories, a rechargeable waterproof headlamp for hands-free lighting, and a solar charging navigation light for your dinghy. Visit MantisMarine.com and see for yourself. We've got a Mantis anchor that we love, and we call it our portable mooring, which is a little bit of the point of today's podcast. Because at least in the Caribbean, and certainly a lot of places in New England that we ran into when we were there a couple of years ago, there are a lot of places where mooring balls are sprouting up like weeds. There are a few ostensible reasons. One being that it's to protect the seabed, especially in places where there's coral or there's a lot of seagrass that is a habitat for turtles. That's a great reason. We see an awful lot of the mooring balls actually solidly in the sandy areas, which would also be fabulous anchoring spots. It makes it a little bit harder to feel like you're actually protecting the seabed, but maybe they're setting up the moorings because that's the sandy spots and they just don't want people to anchor in the seagrass. There you go. Another ostensible reason, I think this probably is part of the case in New England, is to allow for more dense boat berthing. Certainly, you've got the ability to put lots and lots more boats in an area if you have moorings, because the thing with a mooring is that it's generally affixed to the bottom with a super oversized, either a concrete block or some kind of a helix structure that goes in there. And so you don't have to have as much scope because you're not relying on the horizontal pull of the anchor to keep you in one place. And so if you don't have to have as much scope out, you can fit more boats in one place. Down here in the French Islands, we've actually seen a number of mooring areas that allow you or require you, actually more reasonably, they require you to pick up a bow and a stern mooring, which keeps you in one direction. And talk about being able to absolutely pack the boats in, you completely can do that. Now, why you might want to be that close, we actually call it Grey Poupon close to your neighbor, that's a totally different question entirely. But if you want to be in some certain anchorages and you want to be there, you have to pick up a mooring. Because there are a number of places where you are required to pick up a mooring. And whether it's for dense boat berthing or the fact that they're trying to protect the seabed, that sort of makes some sense. There, of course, is a cynical way of seeing the moorings that it's a revenue source. And it might actually be a reasonable reason, especially for the person maintaining the mooring. And a lot of places disallow anchoring within the mooring field, which, given what I was talking about a little bit earlier in terms of the scope needed on a mooring and the larger scope that you need on an anchored boat, the swing radius is going to be totally different. And so yeah, it's probably not great to be anchored in the middle of a mooring field. But the question comes when you ask the question about whether these moorings have been maintained. Because if you're forking over $20 or $30 or $40 or $50 or even $60 or $70 a night to pick up a mooring, you kind of might assume that it's in good shape. You might assume that it's a big, huge thing on the bottom, especially if the mooring ball is marked and says, okay, you can be up to, 20 tons or 50 feet or whatever it might be marked on the mooring. You might assume that that means that it's been tested. The gear's been tested and it's all in really good shape and you totally can trust it and rely on it, and it's going to keep your boat safe. And most boats do wind up hanging on commercial moorings with no issue whatsoever. It's not always the case, though. And there have been some very spectacular failures of moorings, including one very high-profile one of a YouTube channel high-performance catamaran in Bora Bora, where the boat came loose from a mooring, and they were in a mooring field where you're not allowed to anchor anywhere. You actually have to pick up a mooring. If you want to be in Bora Bora, you have to pick up a mooring. And they went to dinner, and when they came back, their boat wasn't there, and in fact, it had come loose and crashed into one of the hotels that was right on the water. And while most moorings in most places seem to be in very good condition, because what you're doing is you're coming into the anchorage, the mooring field, and you're seeing a ball with some way of attaching to your boat, and you reach down and you hook your boat to the mooring ball and you say, oh, cool, great, I've handed over my money, it must be in good shape. But the fact remains is you are trusting your boat to someone else's gear. And most mooring fields and most mooring places, people are working really hard to maintain these moorings. Please don't think that I'm saying that they're all terrible, because that's not what I'm saying at all. But it's just a reminder that if you're picking up a mooring, you are trusting your boat to somebody else's gear. And sure, you could dive on the mooring. You could dive in to check, to look and see. Sometimes those moorings are in super deep harbors. And that may be another reason that they've set up moorings, is to make it possible for people to be there, because they don't have the anchor gear to be able to anchor in 50 feet of water and wanting to put out 4-to-1 or 5-to-1 scope. But if you are paying upwards of $70 a night for a mooring, you probably are inclined, because you think, of course, I'm paying the money, it must be in good shape, you're kind of inclined to trust the gear. So I would suggest or encourage or implore, or whatever the word is, to encourage you to learn how to trust your own anchor gear. It is certainly our preference to anchor where we're allowed. The only place so far where we've grabbed a mooring, other than places where it's required, which is in the United States Virgin Islands in St. John, and the other place, where do we pick up a mooring? We picked up a mooring in Petite-Terre in Guadeloupe, which is part of a national park system in Guadeloupe, and you aren't allowed to anchor. There's no anchoring allowed whatsoever. In fact, you can't even anchor in a dinghy there. But other than that, and we could have anchored in the Saints, and we chose to pick up a mooring because we just didn't feel like anchoring in 35 feet of water or in a spot pretty far away from town, because you aren't allowed to anchor in the mooring field. And we were on that mooring for about a week. We did go snorkel on it and dive on it and inspect it as closely as we could. Probably it would have been better if we'd been on our own gear. But my encouragement to you is to learn how to anchor, to understand how your particular anchor works with your particular boat and how you like to set your hook. If you're not comfortable with your anchor or your anchoring gear or your anchoring system, figure out why and learn how to either upgrade the gear, change it out, or ask questions about how to anchor and how to use your particular whole system properly. Because generally, if you can anchor and be on your own gear, you have some idea as to what's gone into maintaining it and how well it is going to hold your boat no matter what the weather is. I can't wait to share an anchorage with you, whether we're on a mooring ball or on our anchor, and we can just toast to our good fortune at being able to enjoy this incredible lifestyle. Thank you so much for listening to the Boat Galley podcast. We love it when you share us with your friends. We love it when you drop us a line and tell us what you'd like to hear about or if something helped you. And we certainly love it if you get something out of this, because the Boat Galley and the Boat Galley podcast, it's all about making boat life better. And hopefully we've been able to help you with that, even just a tiny, tiny little bit. Have a great week.